Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and I can't believe we've already done 30 of these mini episodes. I have gotten fantastic feedback on them, so thank you so much for everyone who's written in to tell me how much you enjoy these. And of course, if anyone has any suggestions on how to improve these or specific topics you want me to cover, do just shoot me a message and let me know. You can contact us on bjjmentalmodels.com or on Instagram. My handle is bjjmentalmodels. That aside, today what I want to talk about is the idea of predictable responses. Predictable responses refer to the things that someone is likely to do in a given situation. And in jiu-jitsu, this is tremendously important. In fact, I would say that much of the time, knowing your opponent's predictable responses to a technique is more important than being good at that technique itself. And this is part of the reason why things like dead drilling, where your opponent doesn't resist, is not super effective. Because being able to do a technique against a non-resisting opponent is not particularly helpful. You have probably had this situation where you went to class and your instructor showed a technique and you and your partner spent some time copying it while not really resisting. And then after that, you went to roll and you tried that technique and you just couldn't do it. Even though just a few minutes ago you were able to drill it perfectly, as soon as your training partner starts putting up some resistance, suddenly it doesn't work anymore. The reason for that is because you know the steps to do a technique, but you don't know how to respond to the predictable responses to that technique. And as mentioned before, understanding how to respond to those predictable responses is often more important than knowing the technique itself. A lot of techniques are just really hard to do if the person knows exactly what you're going to do and they respond quickly. Sometimes there's just a physiological response to things. For example, if I push you or pull you, you're probably going to react before you've even realized what you've done. On the other hand, there's also trained responses, where due to dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds and hundreds of repetitions in the room, you know what the correct answer is to defend a technique that's being done to you. In both cases, I've attempted something on you and you've put up a defense. So if I'm not used to training with someone who is defending, then my technique is already going to fail. Very few techniques just work exactly as they're shown in the textbook. Normally, you try something, your opponent responds, and then the question becomes, how good are you at answering that response with another question that you can pose to them? Josh Wentworth, a jiu-jitsu black belt and friend of the show, often talks about how jiu-jitsu is a game of questions and answers. When I'm attacking you, I'm asking you a question. Do you know the answer to this attack? And if you do, great, then you defend. And now I have to ask you another question. I have to follow up. And we keep going until I'm able to ask a question that you're not able to answer. If you want an example of this, let's talk about judo throws. It is very hard to just hit a throw on an opponent that is standing still and in base. That's why in judo, throws are often opened up with kazushi, which is a balance break. You either try to push or pull your opponent to get them moving, to get them off balance. And then from there, you can enter into the throw. This works because kazushi leads to a predictable response. You take your opponent off balance, you force them to step or change their weight placement, and that makes it easier to then get into that throw. If you were to just attempt a throw without kazushi, you're not likely to get it, and that's because you never set your opponent up into a situation where they had to give you a predictable response. This also brings up another valuable point of predictable responses. They make it much easier to guess at what your opponent is likely going to do and then to respond to that. And if you know the predictable responses to things, that can be like a superpower because it feels sometimes like you're mind reading your opponent. You know what they're going to do before they even do it, so you can be ready and you can be one step ahead of them. And that happens because you did something that forced them to create a predictable response. Here's a good example. If I am in your guard, it's very hard for me to know exactly what you're going to do because there are so many different options available to you as a guard player. That's part of the reason why we look at the guard as a good position, even though you're on the bottom. It's because when you're using your arms and legs in parallel, you've got a lot of attack options. There's much that you can still do. Compare that to something like if I'm on your back. Now, my ability to attack you is significantly increased, and my ability to hold that position is also pretty good because I know the predictable responses. There's only a handful of back escapes you're likely to do, and if I know those and I'm ready for them, I can make it much harder for you to get out of that position. So certainty and probabilities are another reason why predictable responses are so important. If I can get the fight into a situation where there's only a handful of things that you can do and I can predict those things, now I can be ahead of the curve. I know what you're going to do, and I can be ready to move on to the next step to ask you that next question before you even get there. If you've ever sparred with a really good black belt and it's felt kind of like you're in quicksand or you're underwater because no matter what you do, they're one step ahead of you, this is probably what's happening. They know the predictable responses to what you're doing, so they can already move into that situation before you even realize what's happening. And the way that you develop predictable responses is by deliberately training them and by adding that into your understanding of a technique. If you think of a technique as something that begins and ends with the steps that you follow, then you're never going to be able to pull that off consistently against good grapplers. You need to also expand your understanding of a technique to include what are the things that my opponent is most likely to do if I try this. And then from there, you can immediately transition into whatever the next good option for you is. So never make the mistake of assuming that jiu-jitsu is as simple as if you know all of the steps, you can follow them and execute the technique directly. Your opponent adds a lot of variability to that equation, and you have to know the predictable responses that they might present. Anyway, if you're interested in this, we've talked a lot about predictable responses on the main BJJ Mental Models podcast. We also have an article in our database about it. If you want to listen to all of our episodes of the podcast, the other mini episodes we've done, sign up for our newsletter, or check out the database of concepts online, it's all at bjjmentalmodels.com. And of course, I always recommend, while you're there, take a look at BJJ Mental Models Premium. I think it's something that's really going to help you out. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.